Geometry Dash seems like a simple game on the surface, but over time the GD community has honed a skill called alternating. A skill that is very important to a lot of verifications nowadays, such as Sakupin circles. Today, I'll be talking about some tips and tricks and a lot of important things that go into alternating. For the sake of this video, we'll be talking about three main input devices. Three of them are pretty common. So there's the keyboard, the mouse, and of course an iPad or an iPhone. Basically anything touchscreen related. But today, during this video, I will most likely be just talking about keyboard and SEO device, which is basically keyboard adjacent. I will still be talking a little bit about mobile and mouse, but I'm going to mostly be talking about SEO device and keyboard related things because this video is dedicated to a person named Goldenfire, and he has been really kind of struggling, at least in my opinion, with alternating on his SEO device. So mostly everything I will be talking about will be mostly related to click posture and things that a SEO device has, such as rapid trigger, and even to FPS, because I'm pretty sure he plays at 75. So these probably will be more specific to him, but there will probably still be advantages for you if you play on mobile or with a mouse. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about mouse and mobile because this is probably the only thing I really will do. The rest will be mostly keyboard and SEO device related, but I'm just going to start off with a little bit of knowledge. So mobile, best case scenario, you play 120 FPS on an iPad or a phone. That is probably the best case scenario for you, and if you do, I would recommend turning on CBF. It may not seem traditional, but CBF is super good for alternating, and I may have not tried it, but it is so much easier, at least from what I've heard from people, and in general, it's just so much easier because it's way more accurate, and especially on 120 FPS, harder and harder alternating things will be just kind of getting near the impossible, especially because you're just limited by a touchscreen. I will be talking more about mobile in the hand posture part of the video, if that's how I want to call it, as well as with mouse, and mouse is basically just like a keyboard, except there's one button that you can really use unless you bind both to jumping, but that's really it for mobile and mouse. And keyboard is basically really complicated, and we'll get to more of those complicated things later in the video. FPS, something completely controversial in the game's core mechanics because the physics completely rely around it, and that is completely true for alternating. Some things you need to watch out for is one of two things you will need if you do not have at least 120 refresh rate, or FPS, or Hertz, whatever the hell you want to call it. Basically, you most likely will not be able to alternate very well unless you have CBF or FPS bypass. Either of those is fine. There's not a significant difference between them, except CBF will drastically improve how accurately you click and how well you'll be able to alternate. But as long as you're not verifying Sakupin circles or silent poltergeist or anything for that matter, it won't really matter that much because the version of alternating that you will most likely be trying to achieve right now is just consistent and maybe a little bit of controlled. CBF is mostly for controlled, so FPS bypass should do you just fine. But I definitely recommend that if you can, you most likely will probably want to have a higher refresh rate monitor just for the sake of knowing and being able to see when you should be clicking during a spam part. So rapid trigger, it does a couple things, such as allowing you to have very fast reaction times, especially when pressing your key. But one thing it does especially well is being able to press your key multiple times even when you didn't fully put it down. This is something that a SEO device comes with, and I recommend making sure that the current setting you have for your SEO device is as optimal as you want. Also, make sure to calibrate your stereo device as many times as needed. I don't know how calibrating it works. I think calibrating it is just like one press of a button. But however calibration works, make sure that your stereo device is calibrated because it makes it way more accurate. But just like be aware of the fact that like rapid trigger, it allows you to very, very easily just press really fast, which is a big advantage, especially because alternating requires really fast clicking. It is also important to mention that whatever you do set your sensitivity to, you have to make sure that when you're alternating, you keep that aware so you don't mess up. And this will be further into the hand posture part of the video, where I'll be talking about how you want to position your hands, because if you position them right over the button, you're very likely to just accidentally click it. If you've ever watched any spammers gameplay, you'll notice that you'll most likely hear a click that is louder and generally clearer than the second click. That is what I'd like to call the first click. It is most likely the click you will hit with your dominant hand, and it will be the one that kind of determines when you press your second one. I think that this is something very important to develop early on, because if you don't have this, at least in my opinion, it will make alternating a lot harder. For instance, when I have a first click, I usually slam down with my right index finger, and then my left hand will go down with it, which is kind of the gist of what it does, but it also just in general helps with the rhythm of what you're doing, which I think is something very important to have when you're alternating. Also, first click will prevent having this thing where you're alternating and then you suddenly get off rhythm and you just start double clicking instead of alternating. This happened to me a lot of times early on, but after I developed that first harder click, it kind of just got everything into the flow. I'll let you listen to a clip and you'll probably be able to hear it. If you didn't catch it, you can rewatch it again, it's fine. It kind of reminds me of the sound of a heartbeat, so it goes like so like that's kind of the sound that I was trying to show you. But yeah, the first click is definitely something that you should practice. Maybe like it won't come naturally, but it's not something you can force either. So just you kind of want to have kind of a firmer click. First click at least with your dominant hand that you use to play without, like, when you're not alternating. But that's kind of what you want to try and achieve. So hand position, something that's very important. You can't just like take your hand and just press the button with your wrist above the thing. It's not very comfortable. What you can do is something called joint clicking, which a lot of people said. Basically, you put your thumb underneath your index finger, which will give it some support. And clicking like this will allow you to keep your hand above the desk while still having support as if you were resting. Then there's the way I click, which is also providing stability with your thumb against the fingertip. And to be honest, this way is a lot more accurate and faster because there is no kind of imbalance and less stability at the front. And it also practices using your wrist for alternating. And it can also like kind of be faster, but you know, it depends on the person. Then there's the WizKid kind of grip that I've seen him use. Basically, it's my grip, except you add your middle finger to the combination, and you kind of just have your wrist kind of like pretty solid. And this will help you. But you don't really want to just do regular clicking. You want to try one of those other ones. You could even go as far as to putting two of your fingers together to generate some stability, but that just depends on you. But yeah, that's pretty much how you do it. Snap tap, which I'm not really going to elaborate a lot on, but this will only apply if you ever get a Wooting product or a Razer product. Basically, it's something that allows you to be pressing one key and then during that same action press another key, and instead of having to release your first key, it'll just ignore the first key and switch to the second key. This would probably make alternating easier for you if you had it, because it would basically allow you to be able to control it better, especially upward spam, which I found out a little about. But yeah, I'm not going to elaborate crazy on this because you don't have a Wooting keyboard, so it won't really help you that much. But it will just tell you, like, in the future, if you ever think you could get better at alternating, you could get a Wooting keyboard. So this is kind of the main part of the video, and I'm going to just really talk about, well, you kind of just want that rhythm when you practice. You kind of just want to have that first click practice. That's just something you want to build a lot when you practice in levels. But also what you want to do, speaking of levels, you want to have kind of tighter gaps than you think you're capable of doing. That way you can build control quicker than you might be able to. Than you think you might be able to. Because in my personal experience, I built control not because I practiced a lot, but because I practiced tight gaps, which by themselves built the ability for me to control my spam. You definitely want to practice as much controlling and consistency, maybe not going as crazy as to playing the top one level, but definitely do something that challenges you and actually feels like a new hardest for yourself. This way, when you practice, you actually feel like you're gaining something instead of just going through open gaps, which I see that you're doing. I think that's completely fine in my opinion. It is good to have like an open space to sometimes practice, but I definitely think it's also important to kind of have tight gaps to set yourself a limit. That's pretty much everything I have to say. I might also add that you need to practice that rhythm for alternating, but besides that, there's not really a lot left to say. I will also still add that you need to make sure that you are definitely focusing on the first click and the hand position, because all the other things I talked about today aren't really as kind of important as those two things, which I didn't explain enough. I don't think I did that well of a job. But I just want to say that what you kind of want to be trying to do when you alternate is you don't want to hold the button for too long. That's kind of something that you want to make sure you're doing, is that you're not holding the button for an especially long amount of time. It kind of should feel like you're a drummer and you're hitting the drum really fast on both sides and you're repeating that process. That way you're kind of get better at hitting it faster as well as hitting it shorter amounts of time. Now when you're starting out, I do also recommend having open gaps as well as slower alternating, because that way you can practice your alternating much more efficiently, because then you'll be able to build slower rhythm, which will then allow you to go faster. One other thing to add is most likely that I think slowing down the game with a trigger or speed hack will also be very helpful, so you can see how you're supposed to do it, and you can bring that up to speed. As well as you might not be able to keep track of which click you're supposed to be doing when you alternate. This is kind of a side effect that maybe I only had, but when I alternated for the first times, I would sometimes lose track of which click I was supposed to be doing, and in turn I would die. So you just kind of got to make sure that keep track, make sure that you're following that rhythm, have a first click that's kind of louder, keep your hand off the desk, and make sure you choose one of those kind of methods of gripping your fingers, or hand position or hand posture, whatever you want to call it. Make sure you practice one of that, because you kind of want some sort of stability in your index fingers so that you can maintain that level of stability and alternating for the rest of the time that you practice. But with that, I think that's everything I need to say, and I hope you have a great day.